whether the Schools Against Firearms Act violated the Second Amendment, which gives citizens the right to bear arms for self-defense and protection of their families. So, going off of that, we see that Teresa Mother, a middle-aged woman who has 2 teenage boys, moves into the city of Hutchins in Colorado. And, you know, the city has a history of violence acts, people who are innocent, elderly people, young people, anybody just is always a target of danger. They always get murdered or gagged or robbed in their own homes, and they don't feel safe. So when Taylor Swiss, a concerned Hutchins resident, started the
Armed Residence Project.
Yes.
Okay.
He started that program to help the citizens learn how to defend themselves, so they would be able to use nuclear handguns and firearms in order to protect themselves from danger or harm. And Teresa Mother went and got a nuclear handgun, but in violation of Section 4 of the SAPA Act, she was arrested for doing so with 2 teenage boys in her home.
Okay, so you bring up the point that the facts told us that she was going to be, or she was convicted under Section 4, right? Mm-hmm. So looking at it from, and I think you described that really well, looking at it from her point of view, she's just trying to protect her 2 kids, given all the crime that's going on, which is the interest you're going to be arguing for, kind of the self-defense, right, her right to own a gun and bear arms. What do you think the other side's going to argue against you? Because you want to take that into consideration when you're coming in with your argument. What do you think the state's point is going to be?
I think the state is going to say that handling nuclear handguns or even any type of firearm is only for purpose of the military or the Navy or any police officer in the city of Hutchins. But it shouldn't be just limited to them, because the citizens, whether they're in their home or outside of their home, need to feel protected, and they need these weapons in order to ensure that when they are in danger, they can defend themselves, that they can protect themselves. Of course, sometimes martial arts or kickboxing isn't enough to say, oh, I'm going to scare the bad guy away. Maybe they need to put the gun in front of the bad guy's face to say, I'm not playing with you, I don't want you to hurt me, so back off. So kind of as a scare tactic. So it's not necessarily having a weapon in your hand and killing somebody is what it should be used for, but more of as a scare tactic. Like if Teresa Mother had the gun and maybe when the robbers came to rob her house, if she put it in front of their face, maybe they'd back off, they'd be scared, but she wouldn't necessarily try to kill them with it in order to defend herself.
Okay, so, and I think that's important. You obviously don't want to make it seem like we are going to arm all these residents and have them shoot people, but you almost have them using the gun as a warning, a deterrent.
Yeah.
Make sure they're safe in their house. What about the cases? So the cases were kind of mixed in, the Supreme Court decisions, and some of the laws were a little bit different. But what did you see in the case law that you thought would help support your side?
So in the District of Columbia v. Heller, there was a police officer, right, Mr. Heller, who wanted to keep a handgun in his home, but he wasn't allowed to do so because of the D.C. Code, which prohibited him to take such action. And with this case, the court found that it was the right to bear arms in the Second Amendment was important, and that we couldn't limit that right to just police officers or people in the militia. We needed to protect the rights of citizens, and by allowing them to have the right to bear arms, they can get that self-defense and the protection that they need.
Okay, so one point that I know is going to come up with the other side, and that you want to think about carefully, since you represent her, and she has her 2 teenage sons who still live in the house. You mentioned the point that she was convicted under Section 4, which basically says that you can't have a gun in this state if you have children who are under 25 still living in the house. With the other material and some of the introduction stuff talking about school shootings, you know that the other side, since they're arguing for the state, is going to point that out and say, well, guns, possibly take them to school, and have something horrible happen in terms of other students getting shot, things like that. I think a nice way that you could look at it and try and argue that same point is you're going to have to try and be more persuasive than their side, but someone who has 2 kids in the house is exactly the type of person who might need this sort of protection because they want to be able to protect their young kids. And I think, you know, if you remember the details of the crime that happened to her that kind of made her and her family afraid, it's a pretty horrible thing to have happen to you and your family. So, you know, the facts of this case are really going to allow both sides to argue kind of very different views. And I think you mentioned the Heller case. Just think about all the ways that you can argue that persuasively, because this is a case that's really going to be important to use the facts effectively, because the courts have been kind of torn because there's 2 very important interests at stake. What about so a lot of our debates, we talk about public policy and kind of looking beyond a case law. You're going to be arguing that this law should be unconstitutional. What do you think would be kind of the benefits of that? You know, if the court says, okay, she should be allowed to have a gun, what do you think you could argue would be positive things that could happen because of that? Or because of at least her right to own a weapon?
Well, I think that the positive results that will come if she is allowed to own a weapon is that she can freely practice her right to bear arms as any other citizen should under the Second Amendment. First, Colorado must consider all the rights of the citizens and their interests only to ensure that they have self-defense and protection. So with Teresa Mother's case, she has 2 teenage boys. They're obviously under the age of 25, and she has a nuclear handgun in the household. She did get the training that she needed in order to use the handgun properly, and Mr. Taylor Swift wouldn't have given it to her if she didn't have the necessary training to use it properly. So, considering what happened in her family with the robbery and the death of her husband due to violence, she needed the protection she needed to get the nuclear handgun in order to protect her family. But what SAFA does as a law is that it limits the rights to bear arms because citizens in her case who want to protect their children and know the citizens who know how to properly use the weapons, who are responsible enough to use the weapons properly, should be allowed to use it to protect their kids. Of course, they have to they have to keep the weapon away from the kids so that they don't cause harm upon themselves. But if they are responsible with carrying the weapon, having it in their possession, they should be allowed to have it in the households.
Okay, and I think that's the big point, right? Because you look at all the facts, I think you hit on the fact that they're getting training. This would be a very different program and maybe a different case if they were just going around kind of handing guns out to people and saying, okay, protect yourself and your family and your house. It'd be a little bit scary, I think, for a court to approve a program where people were just getting guns and there wasn't kind of the same emphasis on safety and training. So I think when you are making your argument, that's a point that you want to hit over and over again. That, you know, this is someone with a military background. He is providing extensive training to all the people who get a gun so that you don't have, you know, the point you brought up earlier, we don't just want people in their houses with guns now shooting potential intruders. You know, you could imagine tragic mistakes with things like that. So I think the